spend too.
Washington Journal continues.
Congressman Tom Cole is a Republican from Oklahoma. He represents the 4th District. Good morning and thanks for being here. Your colleague, Representative Paul Ryan, released a budget plan this week. Why do you support it?
I think Paul is actually one of the few people in the country that's serious about dealing with the long-term structural deficit that we're facing, and that I think is really the crux of our economic problems. And I'm very proud of what he's recommended on Medicare, very proud that he's dealing with the sequester in his budget, so we won't have devastating across-the-board cuts to both domestic and military programs next year. And very proud that he's laid out what I think is a framework for long-term tax reform. So it's a solid budget, it's a thoughtful budget, and in that sense it makes quite a contrast with the Senate, which has not produced a budget in 3 years, or with the President's budget, which is largely silent on really the critical issues in front of us.
What Congressman Ryan is putting forth is not expected to get through the Senate. Is it symbolic, or is there more meat here than just...
Well, there's a lot of meat. I think people underestimate it when they say it's not going to have any impact because it doesn't get through the Senate. The reality is we will appropriate to that budget. I mean, we'll operate within the House along the lines that Paul has laid out. But there's no question this is a document that helps frame a great national debate that I think is going to occur in the context of the presidential campaign this year. So it has a practical impact. It puts us on record as a party. You're going to know what we're going to do if we're fortunate enough to win the Senate and fortunate enough to have a Republican president. So I think it's a good place for us to be.
Let's take a listen to the Senate Budget Committee Chairman Kent Conrad, a Democrat of North Dakota. On Tuesday, he was responding to the Republican charge that Senate Democrats haven't come up with their own plan.
We do have a budget. It is the law of the land. It was passed last year. It is in place. Those who say we do not have a budget have either failed to pay attention to what they voted on, or they are deliberately trying to mislead the public. The Budget Control Act was passed by the House of Representatives. It was passed by the United States Senate on an overwhelming bipartisan vote. It was signed into law by the President. It is now the law of the land.
That Senate Budget Committee Chairman Kent Conrad. Congressman Cole, what's your response?
Well, first of all, we don't have a budget. We have a number. We have a number that will appropriate discretionary spending to. That's not a budget. A real budget would tell you what are you going to do over the next 10 years in terms of dealing with long-term deficit. What are you going to do on Medicare? What are you going to do on Medicaid? What's your plan to deal with the $1.3 trillion deficits that aren't going away anytime soon? And the sad fact is the Democrats in the Senate haven't produced a budget in 3 years. They don't need 60 votes to do that. They just need 51 of their own people to vote for one. Democrats, when they were in the majority in the House the last year, did not present a budget. We're told they're going to present one next week, which I think is actually a very good thing. It means they're entering the debate in a real way. But frankly, I think the Senate Democrats just haven't gotten their job done, and I think Senator Conrad's trying to put the best face on a pretty bad situation and a pretty embarrassing situation. I mean, to not write a budget is to basically say we're not capable of governing and we're not willing to be honest and open with the American people. So I'm glad we've avoided that.
The Washington Post had a recent op-ed piece. It's called Sleight of Hand Budgeting. There's no credible path to deficit reduction without a combination of spending cuts and revenue increases. This is the fundamental conclusion of every responsible group that has examined the issue, most prominently the Simpson-Bowles Commission. And it's the fundamental failure of the budget blueprint released Tuesday by Congressman Ryan.
That's simply not true. We all know that the drivers in the deficit, frankly, are not the lack of revenue, but frankly, they're the failure to deal with long-term entitlements and the retirement, pending retirement of the baby boom generation. Paul takes on what's really the tough part of the budget issue. In terms of revenue, look, all the Bush tax cuts come to an end at the end of this year. The payroll tax deduction that the President fought for comes to an end at the end of this year. Sequester begins the first day of next year. The revenue situation will be dealt with, frankly, by the end of the year, one way or the other. It'll probably depend on who wins the election. But if you gave the President and the Democrats every tax increase they asked for, you're still talking about trillions of dollars in shortfall over the next decade. So Getting the entitlement issue right is actually the main thing, and that's what the Bryan budget does.
Congressman Cole, what did you learn from Paul Ryan's plan last year? A lot of concern over Medicare. There's a lot of attention paid, even on the campaign trail, Republican candidates for president talking about it. Newt Gingrich sort of going back and forth on what his take on this was. What did you learn from that, and what has Congressman Ryan done differently?
Well, I think, first of all, you learned you can touch the third rail of politics and survive, and that big problems take bold solutions, and you're better off to lay them out and make your case. We've done that. I think, actually, if you look over the course of the special elections, we know we can argue and win this argument. And I think the American people know we've got very serious problems, and they're looking for people who will actually be honest with them. They don't expect magic solutions that are going to be absolutely painless, so they want politicians to lay them out. So that's the number one thing. It's time to be bold. Number two is that so far the other side hasn't been willing to engage in the debate. Remember, the president appointed the Simpson-Bowles Commission. 60% of those members, including some of the Republicans like Tom Coburn, voted for it. The president never embraced his own commission's proposal. It's not in any of his budget. We still don't know what he's willing to do long term. And I think the failure to lay that out is really a failure of leadership.
If you'd like to join the conversation and speak with Representative Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma, here are the numbers to call. Democrats, 202-737-0001, Republicans, 202-737-0002, and independent callers, 202-628-0205. First up is Anthony, independent line from Valdosta, Georgia. Good morning.
Good morning. I thought it very appropriate that the representative is on discussing the budget after we talked about education. My question for him is, why don't we use the tax code to incentivize everything else but parent involvement in their children's education? Why don't we utilize the tax code, say the child tax deduction, to incentivize parent involvement? Have that tiered out for the performance of the children in schools. And I just listened for the representative's response to that.
Well, actually, it's a good idea, and it's done quite often at the state level. That is, many states will have special deductions for money spent on a child's education. Obviously, you have 529s, college saving plans. So there's a variety of ways this should be and can be done. I think federally it's worth looking at something like that, and I suspect next year we're going to be in a major debate over long-term tax reform. But broadly speaking, I think what we need to do is to try and remove a lot of the exemptions and credits and what have you, at least have a debate about which ones we want to keep, and try to lower and flatten out the tax base. So I suspect there'll be some discussion about this next year. Again, so far it's been mostly a state idea as opposed to a federal idea.
Next caller is Jan, Democrat in Orlando, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi there.
Listen, my question, I got two questions. First off, I'd like to know if this congressman, how many years has he served, or is he with the Tea Party? Number two, my second question is, we have passed the budget last year. Senate has passed the budget. Everything's been passed, but we have a party in the Congress that is a party of no. Their main goal is to destroy this president. They cannot back this president. And then they're worried about the 1%ers, and instead of giving them the tax, they need to pay their fair share. I have a candidate running for president, and he only pays 15%. And you just take every people that are normal paid, $10, $12 an hour to $15 an hour per hour. They are paying 30%, at least 30%. Now, I know he is Republican and he wants to destroy our country.
Well, let's get a response from the congressman.
That's a little dramatic. I don't think anybody, Democrat or Republican, wants to destroy the country. Honestly, I think they want to try and make it better. They have competing ideas about how to do that. In terms of my time in Congress, I was elected in 2002, began serving in January of 2003. I'm not a member of any party other than the Republican Party, although I certainly appreciate what the Tea Party's done. I think it's energized the debate and got us focused on issues. It was clearly an integral part in the Republicans retaking the House in 2010. I think it'll be an important component in a Republican coalition going forward in 2012. In terms of we passed a budget, I'm going to disagree with your caller. We didn't pass a budget last year. With the House of Representatives, the Republicans passed a budget. The president submitted a budget, and that budget got 0 votes in the Democratic Senate. It failed 97-0. Even the Democrats wouldn't vote for the president's budget. The Ryan budget not only passed the House, but it got 42 votes in the Senate. And so it's actually the only viable option out there that's a real budget. We'll pass a budget again next week. I hope our Democratic friends who didn't submit one for even consideration last year will do that this next week. I think they will. I think that's a good thing, and we'll have a clear contrast between where the two parties want to go. So I hope that answered your question.
Jim asks on Twitter, whose budget proposal goes farther toward balancing the budget and paying down the debt? Congressman Paul Ryan's or Congressman Ron Paul's proposals?
Ron Paul's. It's quicker, faster, pretty dramatic. Both of them eventually balance, which the president's budget that has been submitted earlier never does. I mean, literally, you can run the numbers out forever. But a budget is a aspirational document, if you will. It's also got to have the votes behind it. And the good thing about the Ryan budget is it not only is a set of ideas, it's a set of ideas that have demonstrated you can attract, at least last year, something like 238 votes in the House of Representatives, and almost make it in the Senate, or at least get 42 votes in the United States Senate. So it's a real document, and look, I'll probably end up voting for a budget that's more conservative than the Ryan budget. The Republican Study Committee usually submits a budget. I always vote for that budget. It never passes. And I think it's good that it's out there. It helps shape the debate, helps drive what's happening. There'll be a variety. There's usually a variety of Democratic budgets as well. Usually the Black Caucus submits one. The Progressive Caucus quite often submits one. So those kind of things are good. But at the end of the day, you've got to push something that actually has a chance to pass. I think the Ryan budget has a chance to not only pass the House, but honestly shape the debate in the presidential campaign and ultimately become a blueprint that we can begin to achieve balance with.
Congressman Tom Cole is serving his 5th term representing the 4th District of Oklahoma, which includes Norman and other communities. He serves as the Deputy Whip for the Republican Conference and is a member of the Republican Steering Committee. Candidate Mitt Romney went to Capitol Hill yesterday. The headline in the New York Times says he was looking for allies. He did get some support from Senator Jim DeMint. Not a flat-out endorsement, but Jim DeMint seemed enthusiastic about what Mitt Romney has to offer. What do you think?
Well, I think that was a big signal. You have to remember, again, Senator DeMint actually endorsed Mitt Romney in 2008 when he was running for president. But he's emerged in the last 4 years as obviously a very significant national leader. He's very closely associated with the Tea Party movement. So I think the fact that he's speaking favorably and we're seeing other Republicans do that suggests that, the Republican Party is beginning to come together. Doesn't mean the primary process is over. It's not. I think the process, in my view, has been helpful and has sharpened some of the candidates' skills. And, we'll see what happens in the next few weeks. Rick Santorum's clearly still viable. Newt Gingrich is clearly still viable. And Ron Paul clearly has a very devoted following, and he's staying in. So it'll end when it ends, but clearly Romney, at least right now, has the upper hand.
Are you supporting him?
I've not endorsed anybody. I actually told somebody, why would you want somebody from Washington, D.C.'s endorsement this election cycle? Look, I think actually the great thing about presidential races is the average American really gets to know the candidates very well. They're covered, they're on the news or in the media. If there's a contest going on in your state, they're advertising, you see them a lot. You actually tend to know more about the people running for president than you do the people running for state representative. So I don't think Americans pay a lot of attention to political endorsements, nor should they. They can make the judgment for themselves. But I'm pretty content with the field we have and be very comfortable supporting, whoever emerges as the nominee.
Jan is a Democrat in Colorado Springs. Good morning.
Good morning. This is my first time calling in as a Democrat. I've been a Republican for a long time, and the Tea Party element of the Republican Party has just driven me away. I'm an accountant by trade, and we do need to have revenues. We can't do it without revenues. And as long as we have a Congress controlled by Republicans, we'll never we'll never get a fair tax system in this country. The Tea Party, it was really a Koch brother construct. Obamacare, along with the death panels and the birthers and all that other stuff that came up, was really a Koch brothers construct. Obamacare is important to a lot of people. But they had to have something they could get people all worked up about. Sarah Palin kind of helped that out. So I have to say that, I'm very sorry that, the Republican Party has gone the way that it has, with all of the religious rights and all of that. I just can't go along with that. And
when was the last time you voted, Jane? When was the last time you voted Republican?
Pardon me?
When was the last time you voted Republican?
It was. I voted for Obama the last time because I couldn't vote for anybody who would put Sarah Palin on the ticket. I couldn't, with all good conscience, I couldn't vote for them.
Let's get a response from our guest, Congressman.
Well, first of all, thanks for taking the time to call in. In terms of, your concern about the Tea Party being a Koch brother construct, that's just simply not the case. Look, I've done politics long before I was in office. I've run political campaigns. This was a legitimate grassroots revolt, a populist conservative revolt against the president. And when this started in 2009, nobody thought the Republican Party would be taking the majority in the House of Representatives anytime soon. As a matter of fact, if you go back and read the sort of analysts at the time, and the view was the Republican Party was going to be a permanent majority. What a difference one elections make. Nobody says that today, and we're likely to hold on the House, whatever happens presidentially, have a good shot of taking the Senate. So to dismiss this as some artificial construct as opposed to genuine opposition to what I think was massive government overreach is a mistake. And it's whether you're for it, sympathetic or not, fair enough. But I would just tell you, politically, that's just not the calculus. It's a real movement. And there is vast concern in the country about the overreach, the sheer size of the federal government, what it's going to do. In terms of the tax question, I'll disagree with you again. If you want taxes to go up, frankly, just reelect the president. It'll happen. All the Bush tax cuts run out. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing is that the president has basically accepted 80% of the Bush tax cuts for 95% of the American public. He said he's not going to, if you pay income taxes, you got a tax cut when President Bush was in office. The Democrats have largely preserved that system. The president could have ended all the tax cuts 2 years ago. They all ran out in December of 2010. He had the option at that point. There's no way the Republicans, even with control of the House, could have overridden the veto. He chose not to do that. Now, I think he chose wisely because I think the country was still in a downturn. He didn't want to raise taxes then, but it also wasn't exactly a politically courageous choice. If you believe in higher taxes, the president could have done that. So, and so far, while he's been quick to propose revenue increases, it's been pretty narrow. It's never been broad-based, and it's never been of sufficient magnitude to deal with the debt crisis. He hasn't coupled it with real spending or entitlement reform that would actually get us to some sort of balance. The Ryan budget does that. There's other ways to do that. We ought to be having a debate about that. So far, sadly, the President of the United States has been absent from that debate. And, it's that lack of leadership and that failure to address fundamental problems that I think probably led to the Republican Party's remarkable rebirth and recovery after the 2008 election.
There is an editorial piece, opinion piece in the Washington Post today in the Washington Forum section written by 4 former senators, William Brock, Jack Danforth, Trent Lott, and Don Nichols. And they talk about the privilege of serving in the U.S. Senate, and they talk about the bond they see as having taken place in the past between moderates and conservatives. They write, perhaps the optimism of where Republicans were headed rose too quickly, for false divisions based on labels more than facts began to be raised. Moderate became an epithet to be hurled at opponents said to be something less than true Republicans. They go on to say, in our day it was common for conservative Republicans to campaign for moderate colleagues and vice versa. The goal was control of the Senate, not absolute ideological conformity, because the ultimate purpose was to keep Congress true to America's core values, and that result required a majority. What's your response to this? How do you think coalitions are succeeding or failing between moderate and conservative Republicans?
Well, first of all, I just remind people, and I know all 4 of these guys. I served with all of them other than Senator Brock, but I knew him as far back as when he was chairman of the Republican Party in the late 70s. Look, we have a majority. We actually got the largest Republican majority since 1947 exists right now in the House of Representatives. we picked up 6 seats in the United States Senate. If all of those seats had been on the line, not 35, but all 100 last election cycle, or 34, whatever the number was, we probably would have gotten the United States Senate too. So politics is by nature a contentious business. I'm not very sympathetic to this idea that we live in a uniquely contentious time. I always like to remind people, sadly, I'm old enough, I grew up in the 1960s, sadly saw a president assassinated, his brother assassinated, running for president, the greatest civil rights leader of American history, assassinated, riots in the street, Richard Nixon's presidency broken and him run out of office just ahead of impeachment. Don't tell me somehow politics is more difficult today than it was then. Country got through that period of time. We had great years in the 80s and 90s. We'll work through this period of time too. And again, when people tell me it's a tough business, I look around the world. I've been involved in a lot of elections. I've never had to worry about disappearing in the middle of the night because the wrong guy won on the other side. My family's never been threatened. I've never risked my property. American politics is remarkably civil. For when you consider, we had a presidential election in 2000 where the guy that got the fewest votes won under the system we have. Went to the Supreme Court for 36 days. We didn't know who the next president of the United States was. Were there tanks on the street or soldiers being mobilized? No, people were joking about hanging chads, and the greatest, country in the world changed power, peacefully and orderly. And 6 years later, the guy that lost the election shows up at the guy who won the election house to be honored for winning the Nobel Prize. So it's a pretty amazing place. It's a pretty amazing system, and we're not in unique crisis. We're just going through a contentious time. The economy is tough. The country has had some difficult years. People have competing visions, but the system actually is pretty strong, and it'll work out.
Congressman Tom Cole is a member of the Appropriations and Budget Committees. We're looking at the Paul Ryan budget plan and getting our guest's take on it. Let's go to Bill, Republican in Troy, New York. Good morning. Hi, Bill. You're on the program.
Okay. Hi there. This is something I've been trying to get on your program since the first Gulf War, and I haven't had any damn luck at all.
Well, we're so glad you finally got through.
Yeah, I'm amazed. The thing I'm interested in, Congressman, is, I know you're all up there trying to do a job, all parties involved, but you guys have a retirement plan that even if you serve one term, you get your full salary.
Actually, that's not the case. You never get your full salary, and we have the same retirement plan essentially that all federal workers do. So nobody retires at full salary. And matter of fact, it would take you 20-some-odd years to get to 80% of your salary, which is the cap. So again, it's pretty much the same retirement system that everybody else has, and you don't vest in it, I think, for 5-6 years, something like that, at any level at all.
Does that make you feel better, Bill?
Then they should take that off of the internet, because in the internet, in one of the, where it talks about what congressmen and senators get, it's a United States website.
Well,
it says that you get free medical and
absolutely
your salary as retirement. So maybe they should take that off.
Well,
anyway,
let me just quickly respond to that, because I actually hear this a lot at town hall meetings, and there are things on the internet that simply aren't true. But there is official website. I don't know where you've got your information. It's not in any government website. It may be something that sort of looks official or is meant to look official, but it's not. But if you'll just go and type in, congressional retirement, there's plenty of websites that will pop up automatically. You can go right to it. You can figure out what it is. And it's just simply not as you've been informed. So I'm glad you raised the question.
Let's go to Neil, independent caller in Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome.
Good morning, Representative Cole. I'm a little nervous. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My question,
Me too.
Yeah. my question to you is about the disability benefits. Now, you say you want to cut disability benefits. Now, let me give you my example, and this is honest to God, that's what's going on with me. Okay, I'm 53 years old. I've been a diabetic for 35 years. Within the, they took money out of my paychecks for 28 years, and like I say, I'm 53. Now, I've been disabled for the last 8 years. They have amputated my thumb because of diabetes. They've amputated my thumb off my right hand. They've amputated my right leg off below my knee. They've amputated 4 toes off my left foot. And I am legally blind. I basically see a little bit out of my right eye. Now, next year in 2013, am I going to be homeless and put on the street because I'm not 55 years old?
No, actually, nobody's talked about cutting disability. As a matter of fact, I think this last week, Sam Johnson, who's a representative from Texas, chairman of the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Social Security, was holding hearings on how do you speed up and make the disability portion of Social Security, which is what I suspect you're receiving right now, work better so people don't take years to fight these cases. I don't know a congressional office in America, be it Republican or Democrat, that doesn't spend a lot of time working with constituents that they represent, trying to cut through this maze. We've got basically a judge-based system that takes a long time for people to legitimately earn their benefits. But again, nobody's talked about that. There's nothing actually in the Ryan budget on Social Security. I do think we need to reform it, but it's more at the retirement end of it, not at the disability end of it. It's a pretty important component in ensuring people that run into the types of situations that you're talking about, that you've had to deal with, have a means of support. It is not just a retirement system. It is indeed a social insurance system as well. So hopefully you're getting the kind of service you need. If you're not, again, I'd recommend you call your local congressman or you call one of your senators. I'm sure that, again, they have professional people that work these kind of cases. It's nonpartisan. They're happy to help you. So I would hope you, if you have a problem, get into it. And I wouldn't worry about your benefits being cut, because I don't know of any proposal on the Hill at this point that actually would cut the disability benefits associated with Social Security.
KP Potatoes writes in on Twitter and asks, how can the House GOP budget by Congressman Ryan be a Republican-based tool when it says tax code loopholes will be closed, but none are specified?
Well, that's what the Budget Committee does. It lays out the broad goals. I serve on that committee and budget, but what you want is real legislation enacted by the Ways and Means Committee. That's where tax legislation is done. And you're going to start seeing some of that. They're going to actually produce some of this in the course of April. We'll vote on some of it, at least to deal with the sequester. But again, I suspect that committee will continue to work through and try to do those type of things. There's one person's loophole is another person's incentive or what have you. So these are always very contentious. They're much easier to talk about in abstract, but the way you do it is work through the committees. The budget sets the overall goals. These are what we're going to do. Then the committees actually write the legislation.
Here's the Paul Ryan budget plan at a glance from the Wall Street Journal. $5.3 trillion savings in federal spending over 10 years under the proposed budget compared with the president's budget. Ryan budget would also raise $2 trillion less in taxes and reduce the deficit by $3.3 trillion more. It proposes a 10% cut to the federal workforce over 3 years through attrition. Proposed top tax rate would be 25% for both companies and individuals. That's down from the current top rate of 35%. Individuals would have just two tax brackets at 10 and 15%.
10 and 25.
Oh, excuse me, 10 and 25%. That's my
I'm sure people like the 15.
My misread. Yeah, 10 and 25%. Favorite parts of this budget plan?
Oh, I do. Look, like every budget, it's got some things in it. If I got to be king of the world, I would write a few things differently. But I think it's really a remarkable document, and it's also a brave document. Paul's doing what nobody else has been willing to do. That is actually put ideas down and run on them, and persuade our conference to do the same thing. That's what elections are supposed to be about.
Two other elements of this proposed 2013 spending level would be $1.028 trillion. That's below the level in the bipartisan budget deal reached in August. And $810 billion. That's the amount by which the budget would trim growth in Medicaid spending over a decade. It would turn the program that provides health insurance to the poor into a block grant to states. Let's go to Mobile, Alabama. Dimitri, Independent Line. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Representative.
Morning. How are you?
Okay. So I wanted to ask you about a very, very important question,
yes,
sir. Okay. I want to know something about this Keystone Pipeline, one right fast. And what I mean by it, sir, why won't the United States Congress bring a bill to the floor and say, we're going to keep every drop of that oil here? Because, sir, with that, you build a container, those are jobs. The people that have to secure it, those are jobs. The people that have to run a refinery and stuff, those are jobs. And you make us energy independent, sir. So and you let the Middle East know that America is getting their stuff together. We can deal with that a better way. So why is y'all letting the president dictate to y'all when y'all run the country? Y'all control the purse.
Well, sadly, we control the House of Representatives. We don't control the Senate. And the president does have a veto, and he has just because we want something to happen. We voted on the Keystone repeatedly. Doesn't mean we can. There's also a permitting process that's an executive branch function that the president, again, controls. But I think you make the case very well. Actually, the president was in my home state, the district right next to mine in Cushing, Oklahoma, which is, we've got the Keystone being built from Oklahoma down to Louisiana. What we really need is the northern end of it, which reaches up into Canada. A lot of jobs here, a lot of energy security. Pipelines are not unique. Believe me, we have a lot of them in Oklahoma, a lot of oil and gas production. We've been exporting oil and gas to the rest of the country and beyond for over 100 years. So we don't think this is an unusual technology or an unusual thing to do. We need to get about doing it. And so I couldn't agree more. Sadly, the president has chosen not to expedite this, but to wait until after the election on the northern end. That's costing us jobs. It's costing us time. And it's sending the wrong message, as you suggest, I think, to people around the world, that we're not serious about producing all the energy we can for ourselves.
Republican line, Roy in Boulder, Colorado. Good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. And thank you for this little bit of freedom. And Representative Cole, thank you so much for exposing yourself to the public.
Only rhetorically.
True. I really dislike deceit, and the former Republican that called in earlier is a low-level political operative out of Colorado Springs. She's one of the ladies that called in. She does that often as a former Republican. It's irritating. My question is there any chance ever of us having a tax program that is equitable so that everyone pays? It is absurd that the poor, as we hear so often, pay no taxes, receive all the benefits, and I mean all the benefits, right down to their cell phones, if they're clever. They pay nothing.
In response, yes, there is a chance to do that. There's a variety of proposals out there. I'm personally sort of a flat tax proponent myself. Probably the fair tax, believe me, that's essentially a consumption-based tax. Would eliminate the income tax. You would then have a consumption tax on about everything, and there are benefits there, or ways to get the money back to people that are very low income, but nobody would escape taxes under that. I would suggest, again, a lot of the public doesn't pay income taxes, but if you work, most everybody pays payroll taxes, and most people pay taxes some way, shape, or form to their state government, usually sales taxes, or if you get a gallon of gasoline, believe me, you're paying federal taxes. So we have a variety of ways to get it, but there's no question the current system we have isn't fair, doesn't work well, has too many exemptions, and ought to be more broadly based, and hopefully with a lower top rate. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what the Ryan budget proposes.
Over email, Vicia agrees that it's not fair, but has a different opinion. It says the Republican budget hurts the middle class and the poor. It's unfair and designed so the wealthy and corporations avoid paying taxes. It cuts programs in education, health, and does not adequately meet the needs of American citizens.
Well, first of all, when we say we cut programs, what you usually do is just eliminate the growth in programs or slow things down. It's not like we're going to be spending less money next year than we're spending this year, but we are running a $1.3 trillion deficit. We are spending at a larger percentage of the total wealth of the country than we spent any time other than during contests like the Second World War, great national war for survival. So at some point, you go beyond what you can afford. I disagree with your caller about the middle class being hurt. I think what hurts them is a tax system that is complex. Most of the people, by the way, that get quote tax breaks, are in the upper incomes, the brackets. The caller or the Twitterer is exactly right about that. But the Republican plan removes those. Basically says no more deductions, and it's upper income people that use most of the deductions. So again, what we need is a flatter, fairer system that expedites growth and distributes investment and income across the board. And I would argue we need a smaller public sector, not a larger one.
Let's go to Illinois. Sue, Democrats line. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
I guess my question is, you're a member of the Appropriations and Budget Committee. I'm wondering why you don't budget the committee, or your committee doesn't do a little bit more about that. And the trillions of dollars in debt that y'all keep speaking about, y'all fail to tell the American people that we spend on an average 12, 13 trillion every 365 days as a country. So why don't you have the oil companies get all the CEOs of all the American oil companies together and say, you know what, for national security, why don't you lower your gases for the American people at $1.99 for a year, just so we can get on our feet as a country? Why don't you do that? I know you're in an oil state. Do you have any oil stocks at all? And how many Republicans have oil stocks?
Well, okay. Well, I don't know how many Republicans have oil stocks. If you want to know what I have, by the way, just go right online. It's all exposed there. I do own oil stock in one company. Although if you own mutual funds, where most of what I have is located, I guess you probably own stock in multiple companies indirectly. In terms of getting all the oil CEOs together, the reality is oil is a global commodity. The biggest problem we have is a lot of the production is controlled outside the United States by companies that don't operate in a free market system that effectively set the global price. The more oil that's on the market, the better off we are, and the more the price comes down. Americans don't like to hear this, particularly in a time of increasing gasoline prices, but we still have, in the industrial world, the cheapest gasoline prices in the world. Much cheaper than France or England, and England, by the way, is essentially self-sufficient in oil. Those companies actually bring us the product more cheaply than almost anybody else in the world, except the huge exporters of oil in the Middle East provide for their own people. We would suggest that, and they also, by the way, pay an enormous amount in taxes, and that's okay. But like any other corporation, when they tax it, they simply add it to the price of the product, and it goes on. I'm amazed at the president's call to, quote, get rid of oil tax breaks. They don't have any tax breaks that aren't available to other American industries. Their profitability rate is lower than Apple or Microsoft or most of the high-tech companies. Their investment requirements are much higher. And at the end of the day, again, when you raise the cost of production, you're simply raising the cost of the product at the pump. So I think this administration has not been particularly helpful to fossil-based fuel. You let the market work. We ought to look at the natural gas portion of this. Natural gas costs about a quarter of what it cost 3 or 4 years ago. And why? Because there's been exploration and discovery here, so-called shale gas boom. Again, we're very proud of the energy component of our economy in Oklahoma. Again, we find it, we produce it, we live with it, we love the men and women that do it, and we export it to the rest of the country. So I would hope they do a lot more of that in other states as well.
Sue brought up the question of investments. Here's a Washington Post story. The Stock Act clears the Senate and advances to the White House. The Senate on Thursday approved legislation banning lawmakers and all senior federal workers from making financial trades based on information gleaned from their oversight work. The Stock Act is an acronym for Stop Trading on a Congressional Knowledge. It's a scaled-back version of what was originally approved in the Senate, though it will increase transparency. Jumping down in the story, it says the House streamlined the legislation, as House Majority Leader Eric Cantor argued that the political intelligence provision was broadly worded and that the industry should instead be studied. In addition, the House removed anti-corruption language. Does this go far enough now?
I think it does. Frankly, it was already illegal to do that. I think this is, in my personal opinion, is somewhat of a media-created, sort of 60 Minutes piece of legislation. What you own, what you trade, what you do is already, required on an annual basis, and it's reported. This, makes it monthly, essentially. That's fine if that's what people want to do. Having been in Congress for 9 years, I have to tell you, I've been in a lot of meetings. I never saw anything that remotely was helpful in picking a stock. This kind of knowledge doesn't exist, and most members don't have the time and honestly don't have the inclination to do anything like that. But reassuring the public, I think, is an important act. That was an important thing to do. I certainly voted for the legislation, and If somebody's done something wrong, believe me, Congress is subject to the same laws and more scrutiny and more investigation than most people. It ought to be. People will pay the consequences. But so far as I know, nobody's actually been charged with anything. Nobody's actually done anything. And if this helps the appropriate authorities find something, good and well.
Let's get one last call in here for Congressman Cole. Richard, Republican, here in Washington, D.C.
Good morning, C-SPAN and Mr. Cole. I applaud you for your public service, and you could do as well or better outside without all the scrutiny, as the previous call reflected, and all the aggravation. But I applaud you and hope you continue on for many years. I want to ask about foreign aid. Whereas foreign aid for friends like Israel that need it for their defense and to bring endangered Jews home from around the world, as we see from the terrible incident in France a few days ago, aren't we sending foreign aid to nations that basically are allied to terrorist groups? I mean, it's sad, but we have provided perhaps $2 billion a year on average to Egypt for 32 years plus. So the $64 billion question is, if that's all continues to be military aid and not humanitarian aid to help the poor of that country, for example, are we not in danger of arming a potential enemy of Israel? And, of course, that goes also for Lebanon, whose government is controlled by Hezbollah.
Richard, let's leave it there so we can get a response. We have a few moments left.
Okay. Well, first of all, great question. Thank you for the kind words. Look, we do send foreign aid to Egypt. It is actually the second largest recipient historically of American foreign aid. That's done, by the way, with the consent of Israel, in the sense that they see this as helpful to them. And it's been helpful. Egypt has been a good friend and ally of the United States, has been an honest broker since 1973, has helped maintain peace in the Middle East. That's good for the United States. We have cut the foreign aid budget in the House by 21% last year. Some of that was restored in the course of negotiations with the Senate, so we recognize there need to be some trimming. But these are tools the United States uses. And quite often they give us leverage. You look, Egypt is going through a time of extraordinary transition and change right now. I mean, it's genuinely, in their history, something like the French Revolution or the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's enormously important. One of the best relationships we have is with the Egyptian military. What's happened there so far has happened peacefully, has happened within the transition of change, and again, maintaining stability in the area has been a good thing for the United States and something that we're proud to have been associated with. So it's easy to sort of demagogue for it. It's a pretty small part of the budget. There's a lot of money, $50 billion, but in a $3.5 trillion budget, it's pretty minor. Less than 1% of the total budget is spent there, and it's spent usually with American interests in mind. It's interesting that as administrations come and go, the basic thrust of policy in this area doesn't change a lot. So I would argue in the case of Egypt, it's been a good investment and one that we probably ought to continue.
Representative Tom Cole, Republican in Oklahoma's 4th District. He serves as Deputy Whip for the Republican Conference and serves on the Appropriation and Budget Committees. Thanks so much for being here today. Coming up next, we'll talk